establishment has gotten in. They've seeped into everywhere. They're like this toxic cancer that's stage 4 in everything. You know, it's in the FBI, it's in the CIA, it's in the universities, it's in big tech, it's in science, it's in medicine. You have this establishment view of the future everywhere, and it's in the Libertarian Party too. And you know, it's what's going to people that want to stay in power. You know, and it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. So today I have a very special guest, somebody that I have immense respect for, my friend Josie, aka the Redheaded Libertarian. Welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you for joining. So I think when we first get started here, you kind of have had become almost a queen of controversy in the libertarian movement, right? But I think at this point, I don't want to dwell too much on like all the hate you've been getting and stuff like that. But if you just kind of want to address it real quick, and then we can kind of just move on.
Sure. I put up some boundaries, and you know, I was experiencing stuff that I just didn't want to associate with anymore. So I put up some boundaries, and we're all moving forward. And I feel good about the future, and I feel good about the liberty movement moving forward with the parameters that I've set. And
absolutely,
I'm
so
happy.
What is, I guess next we'll just roll right into the liberty movement. What is like your view of the liberty movement right now? Because I know you've told me before you're not really into the Libertarian Party politics of it. So how do you see politics in the liberty movement?
Well, I'm a Ron Paul libertarian is what I'm a Ron Paul libertarian. So I yes, I'm personal responsibility, accountability, property rights, non-aggression, and self-ownership are kind of my principles. You know, then there's a few things that like libertarians are split on a lot of different policies, like borders, abortions, you know, things like that.
Yep.
You know, for me, when it comes to like borders, I believe borders are an extension of property rights. And I also believe as long as there's a welfare state, we can't have open borders, you know, so I feel like that's something we can maybe address sometime in the future. But I believe that borders are an extension of property rights. I also believe I call myself pro-baby, not pro-life, like, because pro-life has kind of more of a stigma to it, but yeah, I'm pro-baby. I like babies. I believe, you know, I believe in life, especially after I don't see a reason to abort after the first trimester, you know. So those and those were the same principles of Ron Paul. Ron Paul with abortion, he believed it was a moral dilemma. It should be unthinkable, not illegal. And I believe that. I believe we got to a point where it was unthinkable, then we wouldn't have to make it illegal because you just couldn't wrap your head around it. Actually, somebody wrote, Jesus never talked about abortion. You know, I saw that was posted the other day, and I'm like, well, yeah, because it was unthinkable. Yeah. No one was thinking about that, you know? So I think if we get to a point like that.
I agree very heavily in that as well, because I would be pro-baby, as you say. But I have also conceded that when it comes to being pro-life, social conservatives have to get really cool about like LGBT adoptions before we can even talk about dealing with the influx of children that might bring.
Yes. I think a lot of that has to do with religion. And I think, you know, religion should be separate from this. A lot of people use the separation of church and state, even though that's not exactly what it means, to explain this. But, you know, this is something that should be separate. I definitely believe LGBTQ should be able to adopt babies. And I know a lot of Catholic charities, you know, there's a lot of adoption within the Christian community too, which is good. You know, just adoption there should be a clear, easy road to adopt. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's part of the issue as well, is adoption is incredibly difficult.
Expensive too.
Yeah, it's very expensive. It's one of those things, like when I was in the Army, I know, so the military, though, they don't pay for like IVF or anything like that, but they do help with adoptions a little bit, but it still takes a very long time, and a lot of money and out of your pocket to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's hard because they say that they do that to prevent child trafficking, but that's like the foster system is where they gotta really worry about how to prevent child trafficking within there, because you just got to take a class and boom, they give you a foster child, like
Yeah.
take a class, give you an evaluation of your house, and here you can have a kid. And that's where I mean, if you're going to drop even $10,000 on a kid, you're not going to be trafficking them, but it's like, $50,000 to adopt a kid. It's insane. So it's definitely
Absolutely.
making it more reasonable. I understand the parameters, but it's not always about money.
Yeah. So, what was your path to become a libertarian, I guess? 'Cause I know we all have it's like our coming out stories, but how did you go into
How did I
being a
come to choose
libertarian?
this?
How did you get red pilled?
So I never fit in anywhere. And I'm in Massachusetts. So a lot of my friends are very left, very like as far as you can go. And then a lot of my family is in the South. So they're as far right as you can go. And I just didn't fit anywhere. I was like impressionable during 9/11. I was in high school, and that hit me differently, and had a boyfriend go serve immediately. Like he signed up and joined the military, and it was so I was like confused with all that stuff, and nothing really felt right to me, and I made it all the way to 2012 before discovering Ron Paul. It was kind of by accident.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I'm like, when this guy talked, I was like, that sounds like me. Yeah. Like, and so I started following him. And just kind of watching the things he would do, watching his interviews, and like he was the one that brought me into Liberty. And I've just stuck with that ever since. Like a lot of people, like they'll say Dave Smith, for instance, will bring him into Liberty, or Rothbard will bring him into Liberty. But then as they develop in their Liberty kind of ideals and their persona, it starts to change. And they're like, oh, well, I, have some qualms with this. I've never left Ron Paul. It's just always, I've just always exactly to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I have a very, very similar path too, because I was a very big Ron Paul fan. At the time, I couldn't really get behind his foreign policy, and then I joined the military, and that changed my mind on a lot of things, But I think you're right. Like you're seeing a new generation of libertarian stuff with, the Dave Smith coming in, and a lot of these high profile, even Justin Amash is starting to pull some people into the party as well. So, but the party itself has its own issues,
Yeah. And I've had issues with the party. Actually, when I went on Timcast, I talked about it, and I got a lot of crap for that, for dragging the party. And then, 2 months later, the coup for the LPNH happened,
Yep.
and it's like, I'm trying not to follow that, because I'm just not, it's not my business. I'm not a party person, but it's like, hey, if only some redhead went on a popular podcast and talked about it, like maybe y'all wouldn't have been surprised that there's corruption in the Libertarian Party, just like there's corruption everywhere else. The establishment has gotten in, they've seeped into everywhere. They're like this toxic cancer that's stage 4 in everything. It's in the FBI, it's in the CIA, it's in the universities, it's in big tech, it's in science, it's in medicine. You have this establishment view of the future everywhere, and it's in the Libertarian Party too. And it's what's going to people that want to stay in power, and it's everywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I had literally, just before a lot of this stuff happened, I had Ryan Graham, who is the chair of the Libertarian Party here in Georgia, on the channel, and we did a live stream. And I had just mentioned to him how the party seems to have gotten over the PR nightmare that was Nick Sarwark and his followers that were in the system. And then New Hampshire happens, and you start to realize that the chair that has just now resigned he was also kind of a stalwart person as well. He was very much in that same establishment, mindset. So, but it's interesting because after that, I do believe Ryan Graham is doing a lot of good here in Georgia. I also told him I'm not really a party person either. It kind of, in my opinion, goes against, your libertarian ideals. But when the New Hampshire stuff happened, I actually joined the party. So I am now a newly registered member of the Libertarian Party of Georgia because I do believe Ryan is doing the right stuff down here in Georgia. He's working with all the different caucuses and everything like that. But if I really want to make a difference inside of the party, I have to be in the party. So, and that's why I decided to join, and probably join the Mises caucus here pretty soon as well, if things keep going the way that they are.
My idea, so I'm gonna get hate for this, I can feel it right now. And I talked about it a little bit on Olivia's show, I think, but I believe there should be 4 parties, not 3, because
I've said that before too.
I believe there should be a Democrat Party, a Socialist Party, God hope they never get in power, but a Libertarian Party and a Republican Party, because the true spectrum is authoritarian, which is socialist, and libertarian, so authoritarian to libertarian. And then you have the Democrats and the Republicans, who, let's face it, are mostly made up of establishment people at this point. If we're going to have a Libertarian Party, I believe it can succeed, but we'll need a 4th party. That said, I believe the way to further liberty is to infiltrate the Republican Party, just like the socialists infiltrated the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and that's always been my way. Is if there's a Libertarian Republican in that I have a chance to vote for, I would probably vote for them because they're more likely to win, and they still hold my ideals, right? But I told Ryan, actually told Ryan the exact same thing. I said, I think we need 4 parties. I would like Bernie and AOC to kind of go start their own party, and then we would actually have 4 competing parties. Which, I mean, you're because then you look at, I released the video a couple days ago about the political spectrum and how everything kind of ties together. And I even said on there as well, the Democrats and the Republicans, the centrist Republicans and the current or the modern liberals are not much different. They're almost the same. I mean, they are so close together that they really have the same ideals, except for they are the 2 major parties.
They're all about, some form of welfare, and the Republicans will act like they concede in it, and the Democrats will act like they won on it, and they're both for the military industrial complex. It's really,
and especially corporate welfare when it comes to, they're both very corporatist. And I think we saw that a lot, especially when, like, the voting bill, like the bill passed here in Georgia, and all these companies started, leaving the state, or, doing stuff like, even just speaking out against it. And then the state of Georgia tried to cut the funding to places like Coca-Cola and Home Depot when their people spoke out against it. I'm like, well, so you're just going to hang this carrot as long as they're nice to you, and then you're going to pull the funding if they disagree with you? That's not how things should work.
I mean, and then you look at even the pandemic, where they closed down Main Street and amped up Wall Street, and that's what they did. It was all the corporations were, making these huge profits. And a lot of people were blaming capitalism for that. I'm like, that's not capitalism. No, this is the government interfering. Like, with the dawn of capitalism, people realized, hey, I can serve my fellow man. With the dawn of corporatism and cronyism, they realized that they could pull the government in, and the government could stop their fellow man from doing anything, and they wouldn't be able to compete. We're watching cronyism and corporatism happen right now. This is not capitalism. This is dirty.
Absolutely. And it goes along with just the $15 minimum wage. People don't see that having a $15 minimum wage, because like Amazon and Walmart are pushing it. The reason why they're pushing it is because they're the only ones that will survive a $15 minimum wage hike.
Yep. They're like, all right, well, if we have a $15 hike, it's going to close down all of our competition. And, we're really not going to lose that much. Because
Amazon's already doing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So.
And if you think about it, like the socialists, they're not complaining at all. The Bernie bros,
Oh, no.
No, not a word about it. Mhm.
No. And you know that they're not dumb enough to not understand what inflation is and see the inflation that's happening around them and everything right now, right? They're not that dumb. We know this. They're actually very smart. They know how to get their way. They're actually really good at a lot of things, and they're good at shaping the narratives a lot of times.
Yeah.
But back to what you said about 4 political parties, I actually just recorded a video about an hour ago, and it's going to be released next Tuesday, and it's actually about the ranked voting system, or ranked voting, as well as the star voting system. And both of those, I think, can also, without a third party or without a fourth party, I think those two systems, which are kind of sweeping across the nation right now, will absolutely change the way that the Libertarian Party is able to compete in some of these elections, really. Because I think a lot of people will be able to vote their conscience with their first choice, and then they will vote, their second choice would be the lesser of two evils, right?
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, I haven't looked much into ranked vote. I live in Mass, so nothing matters here. Nothing matters.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, well, I write in Ron Paul every single time I go to vote. Like it's nothing matters right now. So yeah, Mass has to move like we're good with like state stuff. We have a Republican governor who's a rhino, but nevertheless, we have a Republican governor, and God bless him. He's the only reason that we didn't go the way of California and New York is because he was like, all right, I kind of got to get fiscally conservative if I'm in charge of Boston right now. And it worked, even though I don't agree with a lot of the stuff he does. I think that he did okay during our pandemic because we didn't die, like he didn't kill Massachusetts. So yay, the bar was pretty low.
Right. Yeah, and then I mean, just talking about like the pandemic and stuff too, and we kind of shift the conversation to COVID and some of the states. I mean, it's amazing to watch a little bit. People jump right in behind, like somebody like Ron DeSantis, who has done one good thing in his career, and then the rest of his career has done nothing.
Yep. So he did great during the pandemic, and now people are like, I want him to rule America. I'd like him to keep him. Honestly, I want to keep him right in Florida where he is, because the president doesn't have that much power. I mean, people think like he has all this power. He doesn't. Congress has power. Like you watched Congress stop like Donald Trump at every move. They stopped him. And even if he made an executive order, it goes to the SCOTUS. Like there are checks and balances in the government. If anybody has the most power, it's the House of Representatives.
Absolutely.
And then combine that with the Senate, and that's who has power. So it's like, all right, you can put Ron DeSantis there, and he can do, like, for instance, like even Rand Paul. I'd rather to have Rand in the Senate than I would to have him as president. He's never going to be president because he has no charisma. But that's just honestly the way that it is. Yeah.
I mean, that's the same as Thomas Massie. I'd probably rather see him in the Senate than the House, but that is where he is most effective, because like you said, writing legislation, fighting for legislations to get passed in order to shrink government is, like you said, it's a lot more important than who is actually president.
Exactly. And Thomas Massie's, he's like, I interviewed him last year. It was amazing. He's exactly the type of person that you see on Twitter is who he is in real life, and just as wonderful as ever. I was blessed to like interview him and stuff, but he says things and he's not afraid to stir the pot, which I love. And he will vote against things that are unpopular to vote against, that'll make him look like a horrible person, but they're principled. So he just voted against making Juneteenth a holiday. And I was like, oh my God, you racist. Why would you do that? And he's like, I don't think the federal government should have 11 days off. And I've stood by that. It's like, this is my principled stance, and it's something totally arbitrary, but he's just always principled. And
that's what I really appreciate
about the libertarians in Congress. Yeah.
And that's what I really do appreciate about somebody like him. I especially the same as when he forced the vote. He forced the vote last year for the CARES Act, forced Congress to actually come back to Washington. Instead of just trying to pass it through via the heads of the two chambers. I mean,
Yeah,
he
he
forced a
wanted
vote.
quorum. So the Constitution
Yeah.
says there should be a quorum in order to vote. So he's just like, I'm gonna uphold the Constitution. And everybody was like,
Yeah.
mad about it, but they all, as many needed to show up would show up because they knew
Yeah.
it was constitutional, and they still would try to smear him for it, even though there was nothing they could do about it because it was written in the Constitution, and it would have taken a two-thirds vote in all the states, or 2/3 vote in 3/4 of the states to overturn it.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
anything.
absolutely. And that's the problem. Like, because I even saw heavily libertarian Republicans kind of saying, no, don't do this, because that was when they didn't want him to get Thomas or Justin Amash, basically, right? They didn't want Trump to smear him so bad, because Trump was trying to. He was trying to smear him for holding up the vote. And they didn't want him to get primaried and lose, but obviously we saw that Thomas, he's a lot stronger than what he's loved in his state, so for what he does.
Yeah.
And then his statement on COVID the other day was brilliant.
I missed it. What did he say?
Oh, well, it was when the reporter asked him if he's been vaccinated.
Thomas Massey, I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about Justin Amash. I'm sorry. Yes, I did see that.
No.
Well, first of all, it's none of your business.
It's none of your business.
Yep.
Which I think is great. Though moving with that and moving into like vaccine passports and stuff like that, I think there's a lot of miscommunication on vaccine passports right now. People are not really understanding what vaccine passports actually are.
Yeah. So how would you describe them?
So vaccine passports are literally just so you can't cross state lines, right? So you can't cross state lines, you can't go these areas with without being vaccinated. It's like actually traveling to another country and needing a passport. Whereas I see a lot of people, even libertarians, getting angry because businesses are asking them to be vaccinated when they come into the store, which I believe is a business's right as a private company.
Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so people are saying that is a vaccine passport that businesses are requiring, and it's absolutely not.
Nope, that's not a vaccine passport at all. Like, if businesses want to do it, that's their right to do it.
Absolutely.
Crossing state lines is a problem.
Yeah.
Because that is a violation of the 14th Amendment. You're allowed. Yep, it's you're allowed to go to any state you want, according to the 14th Amendment, and nobody can stop you. There's free travel between states.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the point of being the United States, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you want to go a step further in that, the libertarians, don't block my movement is like the open borders thing, right?
Yeah.
Which is a communist, by the way. I can get into that if you want. But
go ahead.
So yeah. So if libertarians are for vaccine passports, gosh, there's so many contradictions here. I don't even know where to start. So if they're for vaccine passports and they're just going to block travel between the states, then it's like, where's the free movement? And then another thing is, I talked about it on Timcast in real life, is Roe v. Wade made medical privacy a thing. So that's why abortion is legal, is because you have the right to medical privacy. Vaccine passport would abolish your medical privacy. At the same time, there's a vaccine lottery right now, and nobody's entered it. They just know that you got vaccinated and you're in it. The government is running that. The government has access to your health information because you got entered in this lottery. So that's a HIPAA violation unless you signed a paper saying the government could enter you into the vaccine lottery, or that the government has the right to your vaccination records.
Yeah, you have to sign a release of your medical information to the government, right? Now that is an absolute that's an absolute violation of your rights.
So it would be a violation of HIPAA if the doctors were like, hey, you can take this information. So either you had to sign a release when you got shot, that says, hey, sure, like, have my information, government, or your doctor handed your information over, and that's how you're in this vaccine lottery. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
Mhm.
and when you get vaccinated, you have to sign a paper, but usually that paper is a disclosure that you know the risks of the vaccine.
Of the vaccine. So it's not saying, hey,
Yeah.
government, take my information. It's not
Yeah.
like that. Mhm.
Yeah. So who knows if they wrote that into the fine print or not, though, too.
Yeah,
I
I don't know. I mean, it's not something, it's no one's business if you're vaccinated or not.
Yeah. Yeah, which that's why if somebody ever asks if I'm vaccinated, I'm just going to ask them a personal medical question about themselves.
If people want to ask me if I'm vaccinated, I'm happy to ask them if they're pregnant. Like, that's
I just
what
ask
it is like. That's like a big offensive right now.
Oh yeah, I just asked if it's a woman, ask the latest results of their last pap smear, or if it's a man, ask about their latest colonoscopy or something.
There's just so many consequences so the precedent violates 14A. We'd have a papers, please society. Everyone's medical history would have to be in some kind of database. That's 4A search violations, like surpassing the Patriot Act.
Yeah.
And, we all have this pure and innocent heart that the government just wants to do this for the greater good. But, there could be geo-tracking of citizens and, putting it on your smartphone, which is happening.
Yeah. I mean, just anytime government puts a list out, it's just never a good idea. Ever. Yeah. Anytime you're put onto a government list, it's not a good idea. Which is why I think you talked about it before.
Yeah.
You talked about you talked about the reason why I think on Olivia, when you were on with Olivia, you talked about not doing 23andMe because they are giving information to the government about your genealogy.
Yeah, I'm all set with that. So it's funny because when people are like, oh, like, you think you're Indian because, you did 23andMe. I'm like, oh, I think I'm Native American because I traced my ancestry. And, I pictures of my great-great-grandmother, like, like with her beautiful Native American hair in a family picture, like, I mean, it's like, it's there. I can see it with my own eyes. Like, no, I didn't take a test. I have enough like evidence without having to share it with the government, but it's like, they're gonna put us on lists. They're gonna sell that information because that's what the government does. They put you on a list and they sell it, and they sell it to the highest bidder.
Well, and unfortunately right now, with technology and social media and everything like that, I mean, corporations are doing the exact same thing. Which is the hazard of using a lot of these internets and not disabling cookies and not using a VPN and everything like that, right?
Yeah, I heard somebody say it, and it was pretty bad. But it was like, the government has privatized our free speech. The government has privatized each of our rights, and that's how they did it with their cronyism and their corporatism. And it's like quid pro quo at this point, like, okay, well, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, like,
yeah. Well, and I've called it money laundering, because, and this is one of my big things that I would, if I could change something tomorrow, and especially with our voting system, with the way that, or financial, campaign finance reforms and stuff like that, it would be, you get rid, like, corporations aren't allowed to donate to campaigns. And I don't, because I think because what's happening is corporations donate to a campaign and then get kickbacks when that person gets elected. Whereas if corporations aren't allowed to donate to a campaign, what's the incentive for them to get that kickback if corporations are really bad, right? So I mean,
not even corporations at this point. There's dark money. There's a lot of dark money, and it's coming. The dark money is coming for our rights at this point. It's like, oh, like, here's a free speech campaign. There's a bunch of dark money in it, and there's no way to trace that stuff. And there should definitely be laws around that, but too many people benefited from it. There's too many dirty politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, I mean, people are going to watch this and go, ooh, they're afraid of George Soros. But yes, George Soros is an evil man.
We should actually think more about Larry Fink at this point. He's kind of, no one's really talking about.
Actually, who is that? I've not heard that name.
Oh, he's the was it Blackwater, BlackRock, whatever BlackRock, is that what it is? They just bought up all the
Think so.
houses. All right, so you just look
Yes, I
at,
did. Yep.
yeah, all right, so yep, so look up him, just look up his name. You'll find out he's this billionaire globalist who is buying up all the American houses. He has his hands in the climate change cookie jar. He has his hands in the economy cookie jar. He does pipelines. He's everywhere, and he's this billionaire globalist that owns this company. And he's a dirty guy, and he seems to be more of a threat than George Soros right now. But he's kind of under the radar.
Okay, and kind of, yeah, because that's not a name that I've heard. I saw Block, and it probably was a post that you made the other day about
Probably,
BlackRock.
Yeah, that sounds like something I do.
And it was in regards to the Great Reset, right? Because I have that on my list as well. So what exactly is the Great Reset for my audience?
So the Great Reset is this plan that we should be totally, just trying to think of the best way to describe it without somebody going, actually. So it's pretty much saying we should own nothing by 2030 and we'll be happy, is like the whole punchline of it. Like, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. So the 2030 reset is saying that we need a new version of capitalism, because capitalism is evil. So it's like an equity-based society. It's communist. It's a world communist society, and there's no way to escape it. We can't sail to another country, like there's no way to escape it. And this is gonna start happening, and we're gonna start watching it happen around us, because America has the most protections. We all still have guns. We're all still protected. We still have states' rights. There's places like Florida is the safest place to be, when the Great Reset happens, because in Texas too, because their governors are stepping up and saying you are not interfering. And, thank God. But we're going to start watching it happen, kind of crumbling around us in the next, few years, as it starts to try to creep toward America. But we're the threat. We're why, and the thing is, somebody had said, if a reset happens, it has to turn back on again. And it's whether or not that's going to happen is the question, because they could reset us, but it might not turn back on the way that they want it to. So
yeah, exactly.
So that's essentially what that is. Yeah, it's like, no, they want to work toward no fossil fuels for the 2050 project. So they have a 2030 project, which is the Great Reset, but then they also have a 2050 project, which is net zero fossil fuels, net zero this, net zero that. And that's actually Larry Fink talks a lot about that in some of his stuff. Something to look into for the 2050 project. But yeah, so the Great Reset is creeping upon us. We will be the last for it to happen to, if it happens, because thank God our founders prepared us for this. I mean, they didn't prepare us for it to be global, but they prepared us for when it would happen.
Yeah, and I'm talking to a pretty well-known Canadian on Wednesday, and that was one of the things I want to mention, is because what's happening in Canada, what happens around the world, generally happens to the US, but it just takes a little bit longer, because we are behind, because we actually fight more for our individual freedoms than any other country in the world.
Exactly. And the way that they've kind of, with critical race theory and everything, and the critical race theory is a big deal. And the fact that, it's a big deal is because the government's trying to downplay it. Like, just make it like, why didn't you want to teach about slavery? It's like, it has nothing to do with that. It's communism, but it's using race instead of class. And I mean, they didn't even try to disguise it. All the tenets line up. It didn't even try. It's lazy the way that it's written.
Yeah, and on the critical race theory point, I would definitely encourage my audience to go watch the interview that you did with Olivia, because that was absolutely it was great how you guys did it, because you just took all the tenets and lined it up exactly how it lines up with communism. And I think that was an important video for people to go watch. And
thank you. And the thing about CRT and things like that is that we're not meant to be able to explain it, because they need ever-changing and impossible standards. They need to always be moving the goalposts, because A, it makes us feel and look crazy. B, we're less likely to challenge it. And I mean, C, it's just, if we can't analyze something, we can't stop it. So it's important to grab what you can and look it over and look at it critically. Like, in critical race theory is not what they say it is. It's repackaged communism, and that's how they want to, you know, that's why they want to get into schools and get it into the workplace. And it's bad, and it's un-American. It teaches kids to hate themselves. It teaches kids to hate their families and hate their country. There's just no place for that in America.
Yeah, and unfortunately, right now we're seeing people aren't coming together even on the language of how we should be fighting it. I think if you don't already, if you haven't been watching Carolyn Borisenko lately, she's been talking a lot about how critical race theory should not be labeled out there as anti-white, because all that does is allows for white supremacists to come in and grab it, and then you're following white supremacist logic. Whereas critical race theory is racist against everybody. It tells white people that you are the oppressors and you should feel bad, and it tells Black people and other minorities that you are the oppressed and you can never not be oppressed.
Yeah, exactly. And it teaches that white people benefited off of the Civil Rights Act, and that they didn't, because that gave them equality. It didn't give them equity. I'm like, well, equity comes second. You get your equality, and now you have to work your way there, and we've got a lot of doctors and lawyers, and there's a lot of successful Black people, but they don't want to amplify that in critical race theory, because it hurts their cause, because it's about communism. They really don't, they know they're successful people. It hurts their cause.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is what you have to remember. I think I wrote an article one time about the patriarchy and feminism, and all these places right now that are hiring women just to hire women, like our vice president, for example, because they're women or women of color or anything like that, and not based on their qualifications, because we don't have, like you said, equity. But the thing about not having equity is because we're only 2-3 generations in. Of course, you're not going to see a shift in leadership positions that are until a few generations, and that's what they want to push it now.
And they're forcing the shift, which is bad. And like there's a lot, and the founders knew about forcing shifts and why that would be bad too. I mean, part of it was like slavery. For instance, Thomas Jefferson wrote a clause to abolish slavery in the original Declaration of Independence, but he had to take it out because there were not enough supporters. We were not going to be a free country if he abolished slavery in that, and we'd still be owned by England. We're not enough supporters or people.
I absolutely love that you mentioned that too, because then you mentioned it in Olivia's podcast as well, because I was listening and I was about to type it in the chat, and I'm like, it was in the original Declaration of Independence. But yes, in order to get every state to sign on, because it had to be unanimous consent to send the declaration, they had to have every state, and not every state wanted to do so. And then it was illegal for somebody like Thomas Jefferson to get rid of his slaves until after he died. And him and Washington both wanted to do that. It's obvious, as soon as Martha Washington died, his slaves were freed.
And it wasn't even that. So slavery is largely systemic, and it was not supposed to end. The laws written in there were written by slave owners who didn't want it to end because it benefited them. So there were a lot of things like for instance, the founders knew slavery was a simple practice and it had to end, and they had to deal with the cognitive dissonance of knowing that they did it and it was okay. It was legal, even though they hated it, but they did it. It's kind of like how abortion is now, with like, it's legal and people might totally abhor it, but feel like it's their choice, and they can do it because it's legal. And I believe that the language is the same, property rights for abortion as it was for slavery, in my opinion. But the founders abhorred it. And so all that they could do was stop it piece by piece by piece. So the first thing that they did was, they did the declaration. They had to take it out because there wasn't enough support. They weren't going to win the war if they had it in there, because nobody wanted to back that at the time. It was like right now, like abolishing abortion. No one's going to back it. You're not going to get enough support for that. So
it wasn't nice language. It was calling the king. It actually took a direct shot at the King of England very harshly for his support of slavery.
Yep. Yeah. And King George he was a tyrant. So the only thing that they could do was they wrote it into they put a moratorium on it, on the slave trade. And that was the best thing they could do. They're like, all right, this is a new country, moratorium on the slave trade, 20 years, we're going to abolish it. And the first day Thomas Jefferson was able to abolish it, and that was the Constitutional Convention when they were talking about this. So that was 1782. The first day Thomas Jefferson was legally able to do that, he abolished it. He abolished no slaves in or out. Like, he got rid of it. And even before that, there were, like, Vermont abolished slavery, so they knew they had the states' rights, and the states were abolishing slavery one by one because it was disgusting, and they knew it had to happen gradually. It had to happen on a small term. And we're approaching the Civil War now, and there's still a handful of states that had not abolished it, and that's when the Revolutionary War had to start. Or sorry, the Civil War had to start.
The Civil War. I mean, it was the Revolutionary War for the South, right? I mean, that's
yeah. So, and
but
then
you're right, and that's the way that And so to hear people say that this country was founded on the backs of slaves it disgusts me in a lot of ways, because it's just people don't understand how history had to be written, and how the founders actually had to, like you said, abolish slavery in those. That piece by piece. Unfortunately, in today's day and age, we are seeing the opposite happen, whereas we are going more and more towards communism, like we were talking about with the Great Reset and everything like that. It's building and building and building, going the other direction and growing government and everything like that.
I feel like it's happening so fast right now, and it is, because I've said, like, Donald Trump wasn't supposed to happen. This was all supposed to get the ball rolling with Hillary Clinton, and she didn't happen, and that's why there was so much chaos, because Donald Trump was not supposed to happen, and he happened. So if you feel like everything is going in fast forward right now, it's because we were trying to make up for 4 years. And that's why, like, there's new laws written, even though they're not going to go anywhere, in the House every day, that are related to the Great Reset, abolishing guns and, abolishing different amendments. And there's I think 3 things that they put right in to there's 3 bills that they wrote right away, like within the first month of Joe Biden, that all would have taken a constitutional amendment to make happen. There's nobody's in there respecting the Constitution right now. It's just trying to get rid of it as fast as they can.
Which fortunately and that is why they are so hell-bent on expanding the court, because they know right now they don't have a court that will allow them to pass any of these things as well.
Only thing that is keeping us safe from this happening, and there's not really a check or a balance. All the Supreme Court can do is rule what they're doing unconstitutional, but there's precedent because they've expanded the court in the past. So they could figure out a way to do that. I'm sure, we got a lot of smart judges on there, but even Ruth Bader Ginsburg was against packing the court. It's completely unconstitutional.
And thankfully we have at least 2 based Democrats in Congress, and Manchin and Sinema, who are every day fighting the filibuster, which is incredible to watch, because it's not often that you see that from the left in general.
And I mean, and the thing is, they know they have the power. They're the most powerful people in the Senate. They're more powerful than Kamala Harris. Because if nobody's going to primary, they're not going to get anybody to primary Joe Manchin. No. Sinema, they could try, but she's too well loved. But Joe Manchin, if they get a Democrat out of there, they'll never get one back in again, and they know that.
Well, that's kind of the same as Sinema's, because she took John McCain's seat. So she's in a very purple district. So they can't put somebody in that's not as well. They can't put an AOC in that position.
These people are literally fighting for their constituents. This is like they had to like vote for impeachment and stuff like that. They had to toe the party line on certain things, but when it comes to the filibuster, when it comes to guns, they're voting in favor of their constituents, which is good.
Absolutely. I agree. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what they need to do. It's the same as what we were talking about with Thomas Massey. They are able. That's how no, you can't get, I mean, a primary challenge is not going to get very far in those districts, which is good. I mean, it's good to see, again, based Democrats, because you hardly ever see that. I mean, you hardly ever see base conservatives too. We saw that a lot with Donald Trump. They weren't very based either. They were all, as long as it was them passing these large spending bills, it was okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which is really, that pushed me even further away from the Republican Party as well, because when you start to watch, like, as somebody who was part of the Tea Party and everything like that, I watched these big spending bills and think people like Ted Cruz and Dan Crenshaw were great at the time, and then when Trump gets into office, they completely go the opposite of their values, and really makes you just hate politicians even more.
Yeah, I know, it's frustrating to watch that. I think Rand Paul only went against his values once, and it was because Donald Trump asked him to, and it was like they had this meeting about it and stuff, and it was for voting for a spending bill, and the spending bill was going to pass anyway. All that Rand Paul could do was filibuster it, and it was going to get voted down, and there was going to be a waste of time, so he just went with it. But that was the only time I think he's ever gone against his values, was for that disgusting, I think it was the omnibus.
And unfortunately he gets a lot of hate from libertarians for that, and it's like, well, libertarians are finicky anyways, because one small misstep and they want to cast you out,
they
right?
want to burn you at the stake. Exactly. It's like, all right, well, this is where minarchists are like, all right, what do we do?
I mean, I thought Jo Jorgensen was a great she wasn't a great campaigner, but she was a great candidate in terms of values. And she just had a couple slip ups, but it's mostly, the anarchists that want to, they'll jump ship and they won't vote, and it's one of the reasons why there can be no traction in the Libertarian Party as well.
Yeah. And like I said, I write in Ron Paul for everything. I mean, the only person I might vote for if he were on the ticket would be like Thomas Massey. Like, I mean, I really have to find somebody with those values before, but I was seeing too much CRT coming out of Jo Jorgensen for me too, because I knew what that was, and I knew what it was lead to, and I knew it was bad, and I knew it was going to get worse. And she was, actively anti-racist, is actively pro-communist. And I was like, I couldn't get behind it. So, I had to definitely, like, couldn't endorse her, like, didn't like her for that. That was a big deal to me, that she was on those talking points, even if she didn't understand them. I understood.
I think it was more somebody writing her tweets, and that was it.
Yeah, it was.
Though she also didn't have, I asked her point blank about what she would do about Antifa and stuff like that, and she really didn't even, she said something like, what I'm doing right now, and I really didn't understand what that meant. I'm like, that's not even an answer. So those are answers you need to be prepared for. You need to be able to say what you're going to do, what you're going to do.
They worry about stirring the pot with the left, but not with the right. And I noticed that. They were scared of the left. That's what the LP, that's what it was starting to look like to me. And I didn't want anything to do with that. Like, I wanted to ask Donald Trump why we were in Yemen. I had issues with tariffs, and they'd have issues with that stuff too, but they wouldn't take issue with anything that was happening in the establishment left. And that was red flag.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. Let me see. So what do you think is going to happen here coming up in the midterms and then 2024?
So for the Libertarian Party or for everybody?
Just everything in terms of overall.
I am terrified because we already have so much crap happening right now, because we're in fast forward to catch up with this great reset and confuse everybody and like have no one know what they're fighting for, because it's easier to move forward a bill than it is to challenge the bill, like in SCOTUS and stuff. The courts take years, so they can pass something and have it, and then pass something to make it so you can't, do anything about it. We're going to likely get the House back and keep the Senate, because that's just the history of what happens when there's a Democratic president. And when the president was elected, it happened the way it was supposed to, like, you know, the Senate flipped and honestly, I have issues with this election. I can't even really talk about this election because I have issues that I'm not allowed to talk about with it. But you know, we're not stupid. We're not stupid. I can leave it at that. But for instance, Donald Trump, like, you know, he got in, and then for 2 years they held the House and the Senate, and there's an ebb and flow with who holds the House and the Senate, and it's consistent. As long as there's no corruption and there's no stopping counts in the middle of the night, and there's no suitcases, and there's you know, everything is perfectly legal, then the Republicans should get back the House and the Senate just by the ebb and flow of what happens in the past, which I'd rather them do because I think they're spineless cowards. But I also think that they don't do damage when they're, for the most part, like the Democrats do a lot of damage, but the Republicans just don't do anything. I'd rather people useless not doing anything than causing damage. So
I was just talking to somebody on Clubhouse about that as well, where they were talking about ending the filibuster. And I'm like, no, the filibuster is good because as a libertarian, I don't want them to get anything done. I'd rather them just sit up there and do nothing.
No, they need to have that tension. They need to have the tension between Congress and the tension between, there should always be this tension. And it should be between Congress, like the House and the Senate should always have a tension between them. There should always be a tension between the Senate, Congress, and the president, and same thing with the president and SCOTUS, and same thing with SCOTUS and Congress. There should always be this tension. And I don't want them to get stuff done because that's telling me the Constitution isn't working. But right now you see the tension.
Yeah. And I mean, I think there's a couple things that I mean, you always see Republicans start to bring stuff up and then they kind of just go by the wayside. Like, I still think that we need to start pushing for a convention of states again in order to get a balanced budget amendment, as well as an amendment that says that Congress can't a one issue vote bill, right? So you can't. I think those are the two things that we need to amend the Constitution to get.
Yeah, every time there's an omnibus around, Paul, take a picture of it and say, "Yep, we got this last night. We have until tomorrow to read it," and it's you know, like a stack of papers like this. And he's like, "No one's gonna."
Well, look at the infrastructure bill that's out there right now. Only like 25% of it is actually for infrastructure.
Yeah, June, that's why there's the whole thing about childcare is infrastructure. And the reason they found, I don't want to misquote this, but they were able to find a loophole for if it's for infrastructure, they only need 51 votes, you know, in the Senate. Like, and they're able to find this loophole if it's funding, if it's money. So that's why they were trying to racism is infrastructure. You know, that way they could call it that and they wouldn't have to have a vote for it. That was the trick. That's why everything was infrastructure, and it was, you know, a joke. It became a meme. This is infrastructure, you know, everything is infrastructure. But it was because Congress found a loophole where if they called it infrastructure, they weren't going to have to pay for it. They weren't going to. They could put it into a spending bill, and they weren't going to have to vote on it a certain way. They could avoid a filibuster.
Well, it was the same as causing with the taxes, adding taxes and stuff like that into Obamacare. It became a spending bill instead of a healthcare bill. Yep,
exactly. So. Yep, and they were able to pass more because of it. It was written differently. The rules were written differently.
Yeah. So I think those are absolutely things that need to happen. But again, there's not any states. Nobody's really pushing for a convention of states anymore, and I think people forget that's even a viable option that's written into the Constitution. People don't understand that the states can actually change things as well. There's two different ways to make laws.
Yep. Yeah, I think that there's 17 states on board with that right now, the Convention of States that I was reading about, and they're mostly the southern states.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah. All right. I think we're getting close to the hour.
That went by quick.
So I did have to ask you as well, though. Where's my pie?
Oh, I owe pies to so many people. I got to tell you, there's a few people who've gotten pies. Tim's gotten a pie. Timcast. You know, there's been a few people who have gotten pies from me. So it's hard because it's like in order to ship them, you have to overnight them. And it
Yeah.
should be, you know, it can't be custard based, you know, there's, you know, you got to be careful with how you ship them because you don't want to make anybody sick. And so it's like, all right, well, I could overnight it and I could have it professionally packed and all of that. And I could do it for like $70. You know, it's like, who wants to pay that? Like my pies are pretty damn good, but who wants to pay that for, that's like $100 pie at that point, you know?
I mean, they are the pies you posted yesterday were absolutely gorgeous, and I just wanted to eat them all, or not eat them all because they were too pretty to eat.
It's one of my, I'm an artist, so it's one of my mediums is pie. I do acrylics and I do pie, you know, and that's like where it stops. Like I can't knit, you know, I can't do anything else like that. But when it comes to art,
Wait, well, you can do that. You can play ukulele too, right?
Yeah. And it's funny, it's I was actually kind of reading up on this. I'm ambidextrous, right? And I'm very logical. I'm a very logical person, but I'm a creative person. All right. And I'm ambidextrous. I use both hands. And I was reading, it's like you use both sides of your brain to do that. So it's like, oh, so because most people are like left brained or right brained. I'm both brained.
Which that's interesting too, because I'm actually very similar as well, because I'm very logical. That's the way I think about things and everything like that. Well, during the pandemic, I learned how to DJs and I picked it up. Like it's one of the very few things in my life that I've ever been naturally talented at. And it's because when the person was teaching me how to do it on the board and everything like that, I was literally looking at it as like if then statements on the board, like, oh, if I do this, if I do this, and it just becomes a very logical way to create art.
Exactly. Yeah. And mine is like, I have a photographic like memory and stuff and a photographic like vision. So I can like look at, like take a picture of something and then I can recreate the picture into art. You know, so that's got logic to it too, you know, because you're seeing angles and things like that. You know, but it's like, if somebody told me to like draw a white cat, I couldn't do it. I'd have to see it, you know, like I couldn't just like make it up in my head.
I'm like the worst artist in the world when it comes to stuff like that too. So I completely get it. And then my brother is like is an amazing artist and he works on cars and can fabricate car pieces just from he actually conceptually designs his own like car parts and like builds them.
And I've heard about people who think like this too. They can actually, like, if you close your eyes and like can picture something, like they're like, do you see black? Do you see like a faded image of it? Or do you see it like clear as day? Now for me, I see a faded image of it. If I picture something in my head, like your brother probably sees it clear. And that's the way like Michelangelo thought and stuff. He could just see
I'm a very visualized person myself. I would consider myself to have a very photographic memory, or of a videographic memory, because when I actually think about like memories and stuff like that, stuff that I've been to, I mean, people are amazed sometimes at how well the level of detail that I can get to, because I'm literally visualizing it in my head as I'm telling the story. And so I can get into very specific details. Like even from the time that I was 4, 5, 6 years old, my mom's like, how do you remember that? I'm like, I don't know. I just do.
You just do. And you have a good timeline in your head where you're able to kind of break it down. Yeah. That's really impressive.
Yeah. And then the other question is, when is your children's book coming out? Right.
I tell you, I got to write a children's book. I mean,
well, and it's got to be an audio book.
Right? Yes.
Because when you actually read audiobooks, you probably have the most soothing voice I've ever had. Like, or a meditation book.
And it was weird. It was like the first time I did a video. I did a live stream, and I think it was Nico, Petite Nico. She said so, like, and I hardly knew her at this time, and I've got to know her really well since, but it was probably just a couple months into TRHL. And I did a video and she was like, you have ASMR. And I didn't even know what that was. She's like, in your voice. She's like, oh my God, I just listened to you talk. And then I started getting that a lot. And it's like, okay, so when I do read off a paper, like, you know, if I want to read like what's in front of me, what I have in front of me right now. Okay. So here, you know, if I want to read something in front of me right now, here's the 23rd Amendment. So I'd start reading off a paper and I'd be like, Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place to their jurisdiction. And that's my reading voice. And it completely changes them from my talking voice.
I remember you posted an audio clip one time on Twitter, and that's the first time I had heard. I'm like, wow.
Yeah. It's just my
it's
voice.
so soothing.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the same way as talking to somebody like Austin, who has an amazing radio voice.
Yeah.
And then just talking to him normally is completely different. Like talking to him on the phone compared to talking to him on the radio is very different.
No, exactly like that. And, you know, it's like this is the voice I'll use when I had to get my kids to sleep when they weren't feeling good. You know, like I have friends that are going through a really difficult time right now, and I've had to de-escalate one of them, and I've had to use my voice, you know, and it helps. And it's a power. It's a superpower, you know. You got to look at
it's a very much a superpower. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. I love ending that on such a light note. It's great. So you want to just let everybody know where they can find you and everything like that?
Oh yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter at official TRHL, and you can find me on Instagram if you just like cats and pies. You can find me on Instagram at KweenJosie. That's KweenJosie. And those are really the two that I do. I have a YouTube that's TRHL, and I have, you know, I have like a Gab, and I have Minds, and I have a Parlor. I just really don't use them, but they're there. They exist. You can follow me there. I might pop on occasionally.
Yeah, and I love you. Like I told you before, I love your Instagram because it's so wholesome, and has nothing to do with politics, and that's what I keep all my politics on Twitter. I don't put it on Facebook like hardly at all. I keep it all on Twitter.
Yeah, it's a timeline cleanse, I call it. So if you're like, you need to just like escape, like you can just go to my Twitter page. It's you know, it's got lots of pictures of my cat, Figaro. It's got pies, it's got my cat, you know, it's got selfies, it's got ukulele, it's got all the stuff I do on my political Twitter page too, just without any of the politics. And a lot of times we just can't deal with the politics. So it's just a place to go to have wholesome Twitter with someone you know, and it's fun. I like to do that.
And I absolutely love that. And then make sure you guys again subscribe here. I'll put the links to Josie's stuff in the description, and then we'll be back here with another amazing guest on Friday. So thanks for joining, y'all.